Hi, this is Kevin Stone for Keystone Outreach. This is our 6th video. This will be topic 5. And this is an important one. This is a critical one. And I can already tell you that 9 out of 10 of you that see this, at the end, we're going to go, no. And why? Because what I'm going to reveal to you here, and at the beginning, this is an important topic. At the beginning, let's invoke, again, as I do in most of these videos, Christ promised that where 2 or more are gathered in His name, that He's here with us. So that you have a spirit of guidance going through this, let's invoke His name and have Him and His truth here with us as we go through this. Because this is important, and the stakes are as high as they can possibly be. So this topic is the so-called mark of the beast. What is it? And how did we end up with it? And how do we recognize it? What's its nature? And folks, it's already here. I get so beaten down. I see these people send me these articles. Oh, they got this new microchip technology, and they're going to implant that in your hand, and it's going to be. Everybody's looking for some very obvious, blatant, violative mark of the beast. Something where they're going to drag you in and throw you on a table and stick a needle in you, or put a chip under your skin, or tattoo you like somebody in a concentration camp or something. One of the critical things about this mark is it says you receive it. You don't. It's not imposed on you. It says you're caused to receive it, but you receive it, and receiving means you accept. And actually, if you translate the Greek, it actually that's actually closer to the meaning. Is that you'll accept this. What we falsely translate as mark. Now what's the word? The word's charagma in the Greek. So it arises from the term for a stylus. So for a lot of the early writing, before we had pen and paper, now there was still parchment and there was ink, but most people didn't have access to those things. In the earlier civilizations, a stylus was used to make marks in a clay tablet, and it was baked and preserved that way. In Rome, they came up with an interesting method, which was a white lindenwood card. So it was some of the lightest wood that was available. So it was a little placard, and then it was overlaid with dark sealing wax. And if think in terms of the sealing wax you've seen on official seals, or that they used to do on letters, the dark red wax, and you would put a seal in it. Well, so so this white lindenwood card was overlaid with this dark wax, and then you would take this stylus, this charagma, and you would cut the angular Roman letters into the card, and it wasn't for writing a letter, it was for things like maybe a sign as to whether your business was open or something like that. But what it became, and where the term charagma ultimately stuck, was for a placard that was required of bondmen in the Roman Empire. Now, in the Roman Empire and its provinces, you were either a Roman citizen, or you were an alien, you were a visitor who had limited rights of passage and stuff. Or, but if you were not a visitor, if you were a resident in Rome or one of its provinces, you were either a Roman freeman, a citizen, or else you were a bondman. And that didn't necessarily mean that you were like a chattel slave. You could be an indentured servant who was a servant for debt. You were serving out your debt payment, or you could be a non-citizen who had relocated that didn't have citizenship and that required sponsorship from a notable citizen. Maybe preparatory to earning citizenship. There were ways you could earn citizenship with military service and things like that. But that was it. So if you were either a Roman citizen or you were a bondman, you were in the service of a Roman. And if you were in the service of a Roman, you couldn't just go walking around. You were free to, do whatever he allowed you to on his lands. But if you ventured out to somebody else's lands or out into the public, you had to carry your Charagma with you. Now the Charagma had, the basic information was, here's who you are, here's who he is. And what it told anybody, the authorities or neighbors or whatever else, was, if you did anything wrong, if you caused any trouble, got in any mischief, incurred any debts, your master was responsible for them. And then he could figure out how to get it back from you. But if you committed a crime, heaven forbid, or you broke something that needed to be paid for, or whatever, anything, in order to have legal status to do anything, to conduct any kind of business, to buy stuff in the market, or anything, you had to have your Charagma if you weren't a citizen. So that's what the term is, Charagma. All right, and so it's not a mark; it's something that's marked on. It's an engraved card. And it went on to have other names as the Roman Empire became the Holy Roman Empire and became the monarchies of Europe. The card remained, the white card, and but its name's changed, and we'll go into that. But let's look at what the Bible tells us. First, let's just touch on, so the card itself is first identified in the 13th chapter of the Revelation. And as I mentioned, I don't like doing chapter and verse because you need to know the whole thing. But I know that's not the way most people study. And so, we'll do chapter and verse here. So it's the chapter, the assigned chapter is 13. And after the beast and his false prophet, and let me stop for a second here. Let's make sure that we understand. There is a beast. There is a false prophet announcing a beast. Separate thing. And then there's the dragon that gives power to the beast. That's Satan. Beast is not Satan. Okay. So we talk about a false prophet, not Satan. We talk about the beast, not Satan. The dragon, that's Satan. Okay. So we're told in verses 11 through 15, I guess, about this beast. Now, is this the beast that we're talking about here? Also, is there's another beast. Okay, so we have the beast that's got the woman sitting astride it, that's got the 7 heads, right, and the horns and crowns and everything, right? Well, this beast. So we'll go ahead and touch on this. Okay, at 11 it says, "I behold another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon, and he exercises all the power of the first beast before him." All right, and it says, and he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven in the sight of men, and deceiveth them that dwell on earth by the means of those miracles which he had the power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them who dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast which had the wound by sword and did live. And he had power to give life to the image, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. So we're talking about a couple of beasts here. So we're talking about a beast that's empowered by the dragon. We're talking about a beast that's empowered by the beast, right? And so what we're talking about here is this beast is the one that's carrying this stuff out for the benefit of the other beast, okay? But what is he carrying out? Well, here's the important part relative to the Charagma. It says, and he causeth all, both small and great. Now notice, all, right? This isn't like, this, he causeth all. So we know that it's not literally all, because Christ talks about those who refuse to take the mark of the beast, right? And so they're among the elect, right? And they're sealed in their foreheads to God. But generally speaking, his purpose is to cause all, small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark, but it's not mark, it's to receive a charagma in their right hand or in their foreheads. And we'll circle back to that in a second. But that no man might buy or sell, save that he had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. And then it says, here is wisdom, the number of the beast, now not the number of your mark, but the number of the beast is 666. And it says it's the number of a man. Okay. Now, this charagma, not mark, charagma. It's your right to travel around as a bondman. You can carry it in your right hand or in your forehead. Now, how do you carry an ID card? Don't leave home without it. You know, whether it's a credit card or ID. This is not one. This is a letter opener, but I don't have any of those things around. So they're designed. You notice that all your cards, all your ID cards, your credit cards, all that stuff, they're all exactly the same. Now even your little insurance card, they're all exactly the same size. It's standardized. Why? Because they're all the same thing. They're all extensions of your charagma. So how can you carry it? Well, don't leave home without it. In the palm of your hand or in your forehead. What does that mean? Tattoo across your head? No. Greek and Hebrew were both languages that relied heavy on euphemism. They've got fairly limited lexicons. And so when there were new concepts introduced, rather than just make up new words, they would string together existing words to sort of characterize the concept, but they would use them as a euphemism. For example, in Israel, usury was forbidden. It was a forbidden practice. Loaning money for interest was forbidden. So they didn't come up with a word for usury. Instead, they called it nashak. Nashak, though, meant something else. Nashak was the word for, essentially, it's a sting of the serpent, snake bite. What does a snake bite have to do with usury? Well, nothing, except that both are things you want to steer well clear of. For whatever reason, the euphemism that they used for usury was snake bite, nashak. Well, similarly, the Greeks knew things like, they understood that if you got smacked in the head, you might lose your memory. The one place that you would lose your consciousness, or one place you'd get injured, you'd lose your consciousness or whatever, is your head. So they knew, they considered that which was kept in your forehead is something that you know or remember. So how can you carry your charagma? Palm of your hand or in your memory, where you can just regurgitate the number. So that's how you carry your charagma. Now it's interesting also because it speaks also about you being those sealed to Satan and it says that, they can be sealed in their hand or in their forehead. Now it's interesting because how are those who are sealed to God sealed? We're told about those who refuse the mark, the charagma, not mark, that they're sealed to God and they're sealed in their foreheads. So what does that mean? All right. You can only be sealed to God by knowingly, willingly, and intentionally following God. You know when you're a servant of God. You are willingly and knowingly serving God. You are acting to serve God. How can you serve Satan? How can you serve the beast? Well, two ways. Either in your forehead, you can either know that you're serving evil, or by the work of your hands. In ignorance, through error, by the works of your hands, you can serve the beast and you can serve Satan in multiple ways. You can only serve God in your forehead. Only be sealed to him in your forehead. It's a critical concept to keep in mind. So we know that there is this beast causing, who's something other than the first greater beast, who's causing everyone to accept a charagma. And accept is actually the translation. It's not receive, it's accept. Take unto yourself is what the actual Greek means. A charagma. So they're causing you to request it, not causing you to receive it. Receipt is passive. Requesting is active, and it's an active verb. It's you are taking unto yourself a charagma. So what happens when you do? Well, this is really important. This is critical. What happens if you do that? Well, let's jump ahead to what happens at the end when everybody gets their comeuppance, and Christ is crowned King of Kings. So we're jumping ahead to the 19th chapter, and so at verse 20, we're told what happens to the evil host. And the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that wrought miracles before him, with which he deceived them that had received the mark of the beast, and them that worshipped his image. Okay. Now this is, again, it's not received. It's actually more like requested the mark of the beast, or accepted the mark of the beast. And them that worshipped his image. And these both were cast alive into the lake of fire, burning with brimstone. So the beasts are cast into the lake of fire. But what happens to the people? And the remnant were slain with the sword of him that sat upon the horse, which is Christ, which sword proceeded out of his mouth. And the fowls of the air were filled with their flesh. Now, this is what we're told happens, when the Israelites would go kill an evil enemy that God commanded them to destroy, and they were left to the fields for the birds to pick their bones, and they're dead and gone, and that's it. So, if you take the mark and you keep the mark, which is not a mark, it's a charagma, then you suffer you're counted among the beasts, these beasts, and you're slain by Christ. You don't go on to the next world. You don't pass go. You don't get $200. You're slain, and the fowls are filled with your flesh. And fowls, it's talking about like vultures picking your bones clean. That's pretty dire. And you would think that with such a dire consequence, we'd be a little bit more conscientious about figuring out what this mark is, this charagma. Again, not a mark. So let's go back. Let's go back to history about the charagma. So this charagma persisted throughout the Roman Empire, the pagan Roman Empire. Now, eventually, the empire split into Eastern and Western Empire, and eventually both ostensibly converted to Christianity, although it was some very screwed up versions of Christianity with Eastern Orthodoxy and then Roman Catholicism. So you had Byzantium, and then you had Rome. Well, Rome, as far as the actual geographic region there, and Italy, had been sacked by the Goths and just had all sorts of problems. So ultimately, when the Church of Rome came up with wanted to create the Holy Roman Empire through the bogus grant of Constantine, a patent forgery that is demonstrably nonsense. But their claim was that Constantine, hundreds and hundreds of years before, had given this grant to the Church of Rome to seat the emperor, to be the kingmaker. They gave the power of apotheosis to the Bishop of Rome. Well, if that was true, why did it sit around for hundreds and hundreds of years until the Carolingians wanted to depose the Merovingians in France? That's when they made the claim. But they needed a compliant monarchy somewhere, and Gaul, France, was becoming one of the most powerful kingdoms anywhere on the planet. And so they allied themselves with, they deposed the rightful monarchs, the Merovingians, with the help of Pepin, and seated his nephew. And so Carolingian comes from Charles. So there was, Charles Martel, and then later the first great Carolingian emperor, I guess great, but well known. Charlemagne is what we call him, but it's actually Charles La Magne, the great La Magna, essentially. But that's not how they pronounce it, of course. So the French being French say Charlemagne. Anyway, Charlemagne. So the Carolingians were the descendants of the House of Martel, who had deposed the rightful monarchs of Gaul and created the Kingdom of France, and allied with Rome, they created the Holy Roman Empire. And the Holy Roman Emperor remained the monarch of France all the way through until the French Revolution. There was some movement of the Bishop of Rome. There was what they called the Babylonian exile, where he moved to France for a while, and then there was some competition with there was a lot of intermarriage and some competition with the Spanish monarchs. But basically, the Holy Roman Empire was the Bishop of Rome, who became the Prima Papa, the Pope, and then the French king. So they perpetuated the Charagma. Because as they set up the feudal system that took over Europe, there was the royalty, and then the nobility beneath them, who were lords of the manors, and then all the rabble, the regular, who were mostly, not brethren. They were mostly, a lot of these kingdoms were set by conquest, like the Normans in England, for example. So the Norman nobles lorded over the Anglo-Saxons as serfs, which, they were slaves. They were treated as chattel. So in the same way that all these serfs, even more important people, artists and mathematicians and stuff, who nevertheless were not part of the royalty or nobility, they weren't citizens. They didn't have the rights of citizenship. So really, the nobility and the royalty became the equivalent of the Roman citizens, and everybody else were the chattel. And so, in order to move between the lands of nobles, you had to have a letter of passage, and they used, the Charagma, as I mentioned, was a white linen wood card that was overlaid with wax, and then it was scratched through. Well, similarly, they of course, in France, they weren't using Latin, and so they just called it the white card, the carte blanche. And we all know the term. It's used still. If you've got authority from on high, from the highest authorities or whatever, you've got carte blanche. You've got freedom to do whatever. Well, that's there's an actual card, letter of transit, a letter of authority called a carte blanche. And in other kingdoms, other parts of Europe, the name changed depending on what the language there was. For example, in Italy, it was called a visa. And we still have visas today. Visas are those are the official notification of a it started out between kingdoms, right? So it was a king saying, this subject of mine is given under my protection, is given right of passage to your kingdom. It's a visa. We still have them. We shouldn't have them. In this country, we used to be free to arrange travel to other countries on our own. We weren't required to do it through the government. We could, if we were going on government business especially, do it through the government. And eventually they set up the passport system and then the visa system. But that's what a visa is. It's another white card. In the English-speaking lands, they called it what it was, a master's card. You had a card of transit from your master, a master's card. Now, what do these have in common? Visa, MasterCard, carte blanche, right? Is that an accident? Is it a coincidence that our cards now that represent our credit worthiness have the name of the Charagma, the white card? No coincidence at all. But are they the Charagma? No, they're not, because there has to be a master Charagma underlying those. So now we have to jump ahead to our history. So this country, we've had some great leaders. We had some brilliant founders. We've had some great Americans. We have also had some of the most dastardly bastards in the history of the world hold positions of authority here. And most of our presidents were okay. A lot of them were crooked. People might argue with me and say more than a lot were crooked. But there were two in particular who just so abused the office that they stand out above everybody else as they're criminals against constitutional government. One was Lincoln, and I don't care what you think about slavery. And we're not going to get into that discussion, and I'm certainly not going to defend slavery. But slavery wasn't what the Civil War was about. Lincoln was a despot who wanted to preserve tax revenues, and also if you read the newspapers from the time, particularly up in the early industrial states, like in Chicago and places like that, the newspaper articles, editorials from up there, they weren't complaining about slavery. Slavery wasn't their issue when the southern states started talking about secession. The issue for them primarily was access to the Mississippi, and specifically passage all the way through into the Gulf of Mexico. Because if the southern states seceded, then those ports and New Orleans would belong to a foreign country, and you'd have to take your stuff to a foreign country, and you might potentially be charged. And that's what they were having a fit about. And similarly in New York, the biggest concern was from the financiers and stuff that were taking tax dollars to pay for westward expansion, and particularly all the money that was funneled to the railroads in a mad dash to get us across to the Pacific so that we could secure Pacific ports and a Pacific trade route to the Far East. And these early robber barons and these dastardly politicians that were catering to them and working for them, as Lincoln had done as an attorney, their concern was keeping the tax dollars flowing. And where were they coming from? Well, by 1961, by the time the war broke out, 87% of all tariffs were being paid by the South, even though they were less than a third of the U.S. population. So less than a third of the population was paying close to 90% of the federal taxes in the form of tariffs. So anyway, Lincoln made a mess of this country. He completely violated his oath of office. He made a mockery of every constitutional principle. He was a tyrant who existed as a tyrant. And the aftermath was tremendous death. 650,000 people killed, several times that number, millions maimed, who could never really be productive again. It was the beginning of our drug epidemic. Was from all the injuries from the war. Was the beginning of the huge epidemic of painkillers and stuff in this country. But debt, crippling debt, was the result. And so that in the aftermath, in the Reconstruction, everything we had tried to do with the American Revolution, getting ourselves disentangled from Europe and its banking system and its corrupt monarchies, was undone as we had to rely on Europeans to provide credit to keep the country going. And we got ourselves totally in hock to European banksters, a term you'll hear me use quite a bit, banksters, because that's what they are. Their fractional reserve systems are completely fraudulent. They create debt that cannot be repaid by definition. And yet that's who we end up getting in hock with. And our robber barons, as that class developed, were more than happy to set themselves up for, a coming, what they were certain that eventually we would return to a monarchy and that they'd be able to be nobles in a new monarchic state. And so eventually we got saddled with the Federal Reserve System, which is neither federal nor is it a reserve system. It's not part of the government. It's a private cartel created by the Rothschild banks of Europe on the fractional reserve system, which is completely fraudulent. And because it's fraudulent and creates debt that can't be repaid and creates massive monetary inflation by loaning on a fractional reserve system, which means a given piece of reserve can be serially used as security for additional loan. So a single, it's like if I had $1 and I wrote based on that $1, I wrote IOUs to everybody I know for $1. Well, if they all tried to cash in their IOUs, for say I wrote 20 of them, 19 of them aren't going to get paid. So my dollar is really only worth a nickel to each of those guys, right? So it's completely inflationary. It's completely illegitimate, fraudulent, but that's what we got saddled with. And because of that, there's a maxim that states that more valuable or secure money will be driven from a system by insecure money or less valuable money, less secure money. In this case, these debt notes from the Federal Reserve were worthless. And so what did they do? Everybody started borrowing. It caused this huge bubble in the stock market, which led to the market crash in the Great Depression. And then what did that do? When the banksters wanted their money, who'd loaned all the money to the federal government, and suddenly our economy crashed and nobody could pay their taxes, there were no tax revenues. What the banksters did? Took our gold. FDR was one of that. Nothing pisses me off worse than hearing people say that he was a traitor to his class. The hell he was. He was an absolute servant to his class. He did exactly what their bidding was, which was to put us all in hock. So what did he do? Gets us into debt with all these expensive programs that he ratcheted up. The New Deal, which is just socialism, and we've been saddled. Socialism isn't coming. We've had soft socialism in this country since the New Deal. Make no mistake. This is a socialist country, whether we want to admit it or not. If you don't believe it, try to get out from under some of the socialistic programs and see what happens. You're going to end up living on the street and pooping on the sidewalk in San Francisco. So what did he do? Confiscated all the gold. Everybody had to turn in all gold. Was real money. Gold coins were real money. Had to turn it in. You could be arrested if you didn't. Confiscated all of our gold and gave it to the banksters. We don't have any money. We only have token amounts of gold in Fort Knox now. All of our money is in the reserve banks vaults, private cartels. So, in the wake of all that, what the federal government, after they turned in all the gold, how was he going to fund his New Deal? Everybody's unemployed, right? Tax revenues have gone to nothing. So what was he going to do? The only thing he could do was to try to secure. So the banksters said, you've got all these people, they can work. Let's do some make work stuff. Securitize the debt with them. Well, the problem is, Supreme Court was never going to let that happen, because the way this government was set up is the citizens of the states are like shareholders in the federal government, and they're indemnified. They were, indemnified against the debt of the federal government. They weren't responsible for it. Just the way that if you've got stock in a corporation, in your IRA or mutual fund or whatever, and it goes bankrupt or something, and a creditor comes looking for their money, they can't come to you as a shareholder. You're a part owner of the company, right? But shareholders are indemnified. So they can't come and take your car or your boat to pay the corporation's debt. You're indemnified. So they just have to eat the loss unless they can figure out some way to get you to sign on as an actual surety to the debt. And you're not going to do that. Certainly your investment advisor is never going to let you do it. Similarly, the citizens of the states were indemnified. The only thing that they can be held responsible for is taxes. And taxes are a matter of policy, so we get to vote. Not directly, but we elect people based on what tax rates they're going to hit us with. So either the federal government goes insolvent and nobody will loan them money, right? Or that's pretty much it. I mean, they have to decrease their budget or go insolvent. So the bank said, use these people, figure out a way. So a couple of terms I'm going to make you familiar with. Aleatory contract. In common law, they're not allowed. If you got the other term is consideration. So in contract law, for a contract to be valid, there has to be consideration. I give you something, you give me something. Like if it's a labor contract, I agree to perform this labor, you agree to pay me this amount of money. For a contract, though, to be valid in common law, the consideration has to be roughly equal. So you can't say, I'll give you $5 and then you're going to do whatever work I tell you to do for 10 years. It's an invalid contract because clearly the value of labor for 10 years is much, much more than $5. So you're not allowed to have an aleatory contract under common law, but under commercial law you can. An aleatory contract is one where the consideration can be grossly disproportionate, or one side could receive the consideration and the other could end up with nothing. So aleatory contracts are like a wager. So insurance, for example, that's an aleatory contract. If I take out term life for, let's say, 20 years, $500,000, and I'm paying $100 a month. So if I pay on my insurance for a year, pay $1,200, and I keel over, the insurance company has to pay up $500,000. That's a hell of a lot more than I paid. But if it's term life, the flip side of that coin is, if I pay on that policy for 20 years, 240 months, and in the 241st month, even the first day of that 241st month, I drop dead, what do I get? Nothing, right? Aleatory contracts they exist in commerce as a form of wagering. So what they did is they created an aleatory contract. So the banksters wanted to be able to use us as collateral for debt. Well, our government had no authority to do that. The only thing they could do would be to get us to sign an aleatory contract. And for that to happen, there had to be consideration, at least the promise of something in return for becoming surety to the debt and paying a tribute. Essentially, what you're paying with your Social Security payments, your FICA payments, is like your premiums on your insurance. It's not insurance. Social Security is not insurance. Absolutely. And the courts have ruled it's not insurance. But it is similar to insurance in that it's an aleatory contract. It's just that you don't know what the terms are. And the terms are, you become a federal franchise, you get a franchise number, which is called the Social Security number. You become a ward of the state, and that doesn't even have to be stipulated, because the definition of a ward is someone who requires guardianship to oversee fundamental things like handling your finances or whatever. And what is Social Security but guardianship? Because what are the benefits you get? You get unemployment insurance if you're too incompetent to keep yourself employed and to have funds put back so that if you are unemployed you can keep yourself afloat. If you get unemployment insurance, if it gets worse than that, you need what? Welfare. If it gets worse than that, you need food stamps and Section 8 housing. All right, these are benefits of a contract. These are symbols of legal incompetence requiring guardianship, and that's what it is. Federal government becomes your guardian. You become incompetent. The only thing about this that is shockingly different from any other form of incompetence, whether it's criminal, where you're incarcerated and you lose rights, or you're a minor, an incompetent minor, and your parents have to exercise your rights for you. You're guardians. Parents are guardians. Or you're somebody confined to a mental ward where your doctors and caretakers, your guardians, make decisions for you, including potentially, what you eat. All sorts of decisions you would ordinarily make for yourself, they're empowered to make for you. But in all those cases, guess what? You don't get to vote because you're incompetent. The vote is supposed to be for competent people. Yet for this form of incompetency, you're admitting that you're incompetent. You need to have the government be your guardian. But they sure as hell didn't want you not voting because they want to be able to perpetuate this system. They don't want voters to say, wait a minute, this guardianship stuff is robbing people of, it's never an equitable exchange. So they want to be able to keep the people who were dumb enough to get hooked up in this, voting for it, to keep people in power that are going to perpetuate the system. But what else does it do? So because you essentially become, you're like a bankrupt person thrown on the mercy of the court. Because of that, they create a system of credit. And the entire system of credit, which is another fraudulent system cooked up by the banksters, is predicated on what? For any credit you have to get, what do you have to have? What is that little charagma in your right hand or the 9 digits you have to pull out of your forehead? What is it? Social Security number. Social Security number is what puts you in the system. It's why year after year they keep turning that, cranking down on that vice, tightening it up for anybody who doesn't want one. Used to be all it was for is for credit and if you wanted Social Security benefits. Didn't have to have it otherwise. Then it's like, oh, deadbeat dad law, you got to have it to have a driver's license. Oh, you have to have it to have an occupational license. Oh, you have to have it to have a cell phone. Yeah, cell phone. You can't have a cell phone without one, right? You have to, they pretend that you have to have it for your public utilities. You don't. But man, trying to get to a supervisor that knows that you don't have to have one, that's a chore. But even stuff like to drive for Uber. They say it's that they have to have it to run a criminal background check. Never mind that it's an absolute fact that criminal records don't include Social Security number information. Ever. That's not some of the information that a criminal record includes. It includes your... Sorry, I have to have a little sip of Dr. Pepper here. It'll include your name, your current address, your date of birth. It'll include, if you've got a state ID, driver's license or ID, does not include your Social Security number. But you can't drive for Uber or the other guys, Lyft, because they use the same background check company that says, we have to have your Social Security. Nonsense. Social Security number has nothing to do with your criminal record. But they don't care. Any excuse, because they're binding you to the system. Why do they want you in the system? What did Revelation 13 say? The beast wanted to cause all, free and bond, rich and poor. And now, you can't even get a baby out of a hospital without them trying to saddle them with that. You can, but boy, you wouldn't know it. You have to be prepared to really work your butt off to get your kid out of a hospital without having a social security number assigned to them. Worse yet, if you're like me and you have a bank account that predated all these requirements for a social security number, after a period of time, the bank got sold. And what did they do? They one day I'm calling in for something on my account. They said, "Oh, well, we're going to need your PIN number and we need your social security number." I said, "There is no social security number on this account. There never has been. I don't have one." They said, "Well, there's one here." And so I said, "I'll be right down there." How the hell is there a social security number on my account when I never had one? And what is it? Well, if it's not yours, we can't give it to you. It's like, how do I know whose it is if I can't see it? You're telling me there's one here. I know I don't have one. So I've got one, but I can't see it? We went round and round. Finally, what they came up with is they said, okay, well, and they looked back to see what day. I said, who added it? When did this get added to my account? So what they ultimately came up with, this first go around, they said, oh, what happens is if we have an account with incomplete information, we hire a service that tries to locate that information. And I said, so I don't have a social security number, and you hire some third-party goobers. What do they? So what? They find that there's somebody else named Kevin Stone somewhere that may have some vaguely similar information, and they just assume that I'm them. Is that how it works? And they said, well, I think there's more to it than that. I said, well, I've never had one, and you got one here. Whose is it? Because I don't want their stuff on my credit, and I don't want my stuff on their credit. And, we need to get this disentangled. So they said, okay, well, we're removing it. They made me sign an affidavit. We're removing it. So what happens? Bank changes hands again to Bank of America. And we go through the whole rigmarole again. And I tell them what they told me. I'm like, this thing got put on. They're like, well, it's coming up on the credit reporting agency. I'm like, yeah, because the previous bank hired some morons to find my SSN that doesn't exist. So they just found somebody else's and stuck it on there. Or who knows, maybe they just made one up. I don't know. But then you guys report to the credit reporting agency, and then anything that's on there from me with my name and address and birth date, they propagate that through. That's how desperate they are to tie you into the system. And I've gone round and round for years on this. So without even getting one, they try to saddle me with one. So what does that look like to you? Does that look like a legitimate government program, or does that look like the beast? And there's no question, though. It is what it is. It's the Charagma. It's the Charagma. Now, everything I'm telling you here is verifiably true, and I've spent most of my adult life going through this. And believe me, I'm not just telling you this from guesswork or whatever, because at one time or another, I've had to deal with the Social Security Administration. I've had to deal with the IRS and other government agencies, even just for the ability to keep a driver's license. When they added that deadbeat dad law thing and had to go round and round, I had to get my senator, Kay Bailey Hutchison, involved. And thank God for her. But you absolutely don't have to have one. You're not required to have one for anything, for any of these things. And, I've got correspondence from the IRS having to admit, there's actually no requirement. From Social Security, well, no, there's no requirement that you have one. And if you look at all the laws that require a financial institution to obtain your SSN, it says, if you fail, it says you must obtain the SSN if any. If any. They acknowledge, even their own laws, even federal code acknowledges that you may not have to have one. You don't have to have one. But you don't question it. You just take it. You can't claim you're ignorant anymore, because I'm telling you what it is. And it's self-evident. And, go do some reading on a Charagma. I had to do, where I found out about this is I actually came across a reference in some other research material I was working on, and went and did when I used to do a lot of digging at the SMU, Southern Methodist University Theological Library here in Dallas, and I was able to dig up a lot of stuff on the Roman Charagma. But you're going to have to, if you want to go look, look this stuff up. You might be able to find something online. There used to be, as a matter of fact, when I first started really using the internet, I was like, here's a good resource, and I was able to find a lot of this information. With Google and some of those clowns running this thing, that stuff has gotten almost impossible to find. The books and stuff where I found reference were all old stuff. I think the latest copyright on any reference I found about the Roman Charagma was pre-World War II, but it's there. This is real stuff. It's actually in the history books. So you were done a disservice when somebody translated that, when it says receive a mark instead of accept a Charagma. You got lied to. But you've been lied to straight through. And it's a happy lie. I mean, it's great. Oh, it's great having listen, I ran around with one of my two grandmothers. The one was totally on board with me. The other one was telling me about how horrible I was for not understanding how tough the Depression was and what a great man FDR was in creating Social Security to keep people from starving and stuff, and God bless him. And I said, he made you a slave. It's what he did. He didn't care about you. He needed collateral to pay for his socialism, completely unconstitutional programs that when he was operating like a little dictator, threatening to stack the court if they didn't do what he. It was incredible. And there are a lot of people that do. And yet, I knew people from, a lot of my family members from that era that thought he was just an absolute bastard and a dictator and the biggest scumbag that ever lived. But, I mean, there are people who... But most people, I talk to people my age. Well, Social Security is a great thing. Keeps people from starving, keeps people from being on the street. Really? All it's done is subsume the role of private charity. Had you rather have... Do you trust the government enough that you think that all charity should be in the hands of government? Because that's what's happening. The tax burden from all of this bullshit, and I'll use the term bullshit, these crappy benefits, and then what do? Most of this money, they take it and they put it in unholy stuff. I mean, unholy stuff. They got your tax dollars paying for abortions and just absolute abominations. They've got agencies out there that are doing everything they can to shut down, to silence churches, to convert Scripture into hate speech. And then, what's left over from they're spending their money to do their dirty deeds and to undermine this Christian nation, to give the money away to non-Christian foreigners and stuff. And what little trickle of it's left, they kick some paltry benefits you can't even live on. My mom's Social Security she's got doesn't pay for anything. I mean, if not for me or other family members kicking in, I shudder to think. I mean, it's certainly not enough to to be able to have transportation, to pay for basic medical insurance as it is now. Even with Medicare, you have to have a supplement, or else your copays and stuff are more than you can afford. And just to live in a crappy one-room apartment with some sort of transportation and paying her medical premiums, and that's it. I mean, that's it. Any unexpected expenses of any sort, and she'd be in the poorhouse. It's absolutely paltry. And going back to this whole concept of it being under common law, it wouldn't even be a valid contract because it's aleatory. You pay into that stuff your whole life, and you die at age 64, and that's it. You don't even get a benefit. You don't get anything. Do your heirs get anything? No. I mean, I think you may get the death benefit. I mean, I don't even really know this stuff because I don't have it. So, but the death benefit's, I think, a few $100s. It's not even enough to bury somebody. It's not even enough to cremate anybody. Or same, it's almost as bad. You hit age 65, die at age 66, you collect a couple of thousand a month for a few months, and then that's it. And the hundreds of thousands of dollars that if you had put those instead into a market account would be $1 million or more. And what do you get for it? You get nothing. It's wrong. It's evil. It takes your money, kicks it to a federal government that does nothing but evil. And I'm sorry, maybe to say nothing but evil is a little bit of a stretch, but it's pretty darn close. It's a government that's consumed with trying to figure out how to circumvent your rights, how to circumvent your free speech, how to shut down religion in general, how to promote immorality, whether it's these gender issues or, look at the gifts they're showering on all these Muslims they're bringing over here. And then what do the Muslims do when they're over here? Death to the Jews, death to the Christians, death to the infidel. It's a government that goes and starts wars to accomplish policy goals. Yeah, and without all this, you wouldn't be bound to any of this thing. Even the income tax is voluntary unless you're a federal franchise. Once you get that federal franchise number, your SSN, you're a federal franchise, and that voluntary income tax gets converted into a mandatory excise on your franchise's earnings. And that's how you get saddled with that. So, there's a lot more. There's a lot more to this, into who's actually benefiting from this, and just how many freedoms you're waiving with this. But you're. That's why people go into federal court, and they try to defend themselves based on the fact that they have this or that right. And they're shut down. They lose the case. Why? Because once you're a ward of the state with that SSN, once you're a ward of the state, you've waived your rights. Just like, a juvenile can't say, but I don't want to go to school. They don't have, the parents have the right to say, no, you're going to school. And the government has the right to demand it, or has the power to demand it. A mental incompetent living in a mental ward, in a hospital, can't say, I don't want that medication. Can't say, I don't like creamed peas. If your guardian there decides that shoving some creamed peas down your throat is what's in your best interest, by God, you're going to eat some creamed peas. And if they need to knock you out for a couple of days with Thorazine, you don't say, no, I don't want to do drugs. You're going to get Thorazine. Well, it's the same thing. So what they do is they extend certain privileges to you so that they can make the pretense that some rights still exist. But your actual rights have been waived because you're a guardian. You're a ward of a guardian state. You're a serf. That's what's really happening, is the entire planet is being turned back into a manor served by a bunch of serfs. And that's why all of us down here who aren't part of the global elite just keep losing ground. Every generation, it's harder to buy a house. It's harder to maintain a car. It's harder to, they've ruined the family, because with all this BS and conning the women into getting into the workforce, what does that do? You put women in the workforce, what does it do? It increases the labor pool. What do we know about supply and demand? You increase the labor pool, you decrease the pay for labor. So whereas a husband could, when all the wives weren't working, now that's not to say that a wife who's a widow couldn't and shouldn't be able to work, but the idea that all the wives have to work, once they are all working, If you got a wife that doesn't want to work, that wants to stay home and raise the kids, it can't happen. Why? Because the husband is, relatively speaking, is only earning half what a husband used to earn. Why? Because all the women are out there working, driving the wages down. So they're destroying the family. It's criminal. But the mark isn't a mark. It's a charagma, and it's the Social Security number. So don't be looking around for them to drag you on a table and inject you with something, or tattoo you with something, or stick a chip in your palm, because it's not going to happen. If you're waiting for that, you'll see the sky departing like a scroll and Christ returning and you on the wrong side of it while you're still waiting. Because it's not going to happen. Because everything that the charagma is described to be is what the Social Security number is. And if it was just in this country, you could make the argument, well, it's not all free and bond, rich and poor. It's just the U.S. No. They've extended this or its equivalent into every country. And now places like China, they're taking it even further to control your conduct with the social welfare score. And that's coming here. Don't think it's not. And these online companies are already they're preparing you for it. When you say the wrong thing, you get a timeout. Now you're a bad boy. You don't get to use Facebook anymore. You don't get to use Twitter. We're going to suspend your account. You're perfectly within your rights to own a company that sells firearms. But if you do, we're going to pressure the banks to not give you credit, and we're going to kill your Twitter account because we don't like firearms. They're already conditioning us for that. So you're already a slave, and you're a slave to the beast. You are, and it's not a pleasant truth, but it's reality. So you can be mad at me. You can shoot the messenger. But, because this is a critical thing, I mean, let's invoke the Spirit of Christ. Here's two of us or more gathered in His name. Ask for discernment. Ask if this isn't all real. Go back and review it. Start it over. You may not have another hour and 2 minutes or whatever we're at now. Write down the key points and go research them. What more important do you have to do? Considering what the penalty for requesting the charagma is. And make no mistake, you requested it. Nobody gets a Social Security number without applying for one. Either you applied for it or your parents applied for it for you as your guardians. They don't just give you one. You apply for it. You request it. And that's the actual Greek, proper translation from the Greek. To request or take unto yourself. A charagma. So, if you got one, you asked for it. Now, can you unask for it? Well, look, you were defrauded. They didn't really tell you what it was anyway. So, yes, they may tell you no, that you have no right, but, fraud negates any contract, any agreement. And there was fraud because they didn't tell you that you were becoming a surety for a debt, that you were becoming a ward of the state, that you were actually changing your status, becoming a federal franchise. They didn't tell you any of that stuff. And you certainly have a religious right to not participate in that system. So, God's not going to care if you go to them and say, no, you lied to me and I don't have a Social Security number. They say, oh, yes, you do. If you live the rest of your life as if you didn't, and you don't use it and you swear it off, you're okay. God's not going to hold that against you that they say, oh, no, you're bound for life. No, it doesn't work that way. And God is not going to hold you to it. But if you do nothing, you say, well, I've had it. I've already got all this money paid into it and whatever. You're not going to be held blameless. And especially now, I'm sorry that I was the one who told you, but it's not like you would have had an excuse anyway, because it's all right there in the Bible. I found it. Why did I find it? Why did I find it? Because at an early age, I looked at the, seeking you'll find and knocking the door will be opened. And I took it to be literally true, and it is. It is. And you go looking with faith in your Creator for the answers to these questions. You think He's not going to give you the answers to these questions? Every time. I've had incredible experiences where there was a specific subject I was trying to research, and there was a book I needed to find. And it had been out of print for 60 years at the time. And so I was writing to there are a number of companies. There was one in Fort Lauderdale I used to get a lot of stuff from that actually specialize in locating out of print works. And I was trying to find this book, and I was having no luck, and the guys in Lauderdale didn't have it, and there was a place in Ohio that was usually a good second source. They didn't have it. Nobody had it. And a friend of mine who was still in school came to visit, and came in with a bag, and he said, our library at the university was selling off some old books. They were selling off a bunch of stuff that hadn't been checked out, in decades. And I thought, and he and I hadn't talked about, I hadn't really discussed with anybody that I was looking for this book, and I hadn't talked to him in months at this point. And he said, I saw this book and I thought of you. And he pulls it out, and it was the book. And that's God's honest truth. That happened. So, if you look for the answers, if you look, you're going to get the answers. God will answer your questions, right? So how did I find all this stuff? Time after time, when I thought I'd hit a brick wall, that door opened, and you have to search earnestly, and there is a God. A lot of us, I don't know. To too many people, God is Santa Claus. Like when you're a little kid, you're pretty sure that Santa Claus, it just can't be real, but you sure hope he is. And there are presents under the tree. Same thing with the tooth fairy. And all these things poison our minds. They get us used to accepting stuff because we want to, while really knowing that it's not true. And they poison us against God. But God is there. And he will answer your questions, and he will take care of your needs. He will. There are times it seems like he won't, and it always ends up being some kind of learning experience or something taking you someplace that you wouldn't have gone otherwise. He doesn't always take you where you want to go. But how bad? The worst that can happen here is that you die, and how bad's that? You get to wake up. If you've done the right thing, you get to wake up in a millennial kingdom of Christ. So how did I find all this stuff? Through years of earnestly digging and trying to understand, studying this stuff in the original Greek, finding out what it meant, and then finding that it's not just that Charagma doesn't mean mark, but it's that there was a whole other historical meaning to the term that was a huge thing. It was a huge part of Roman life. If you're running a stall in the market, is this a citizen or does he have his Charagma? If you're the authorities and you stop somebody and it's like, saw you take a bite out of that apple over there and you didn't pay for it, and I don't recognize you as a citizen, where's your Charagma? Then they drag you back by your ear to your master and say, you owe some folks for an apple. But that's what it is. And all the other stuff, what are the odds that all these different words for charagma have become the end use cards of this illegitimate credit system? And it is an illegitimate credit. It's predicated in fraud. It's predicated in evil. It's predicated in usury, which the Bible forbids. It's a fractional reserve system, which is fraudulent because it loans, it makes pretense of lending something that it does not possess. It's as simple as this. Again, if I write 10 of you IOUs for $100 and all I've got's $100, I just committed fraud because that's a negotiable instrument. And if they pass that along to somebody else to purchase something else, and then it comes time to come and collect, I never had it. I can't, that's fraud. That's securities fraud by definition. It's a fraudulent system. It's evil at its core. It's predicated in fraud, in usury, in false imprisonment, and then it's used coercively. It's used coercively to make you do evil and to accept evil. So I don't know what else to tell you. A lot of people, like I said, aren't going to like this. Hopefully, more than a few people will see this because it's important. And again, let's consider what the wages are. The vulture's pecking at your flesh as your master and his master are cast into the lake of fire. And that's what it says. It's, go to chapter 19 and read it. And those aren't the only places. Read through the whole, if you read through the whole thing, there are multiple places where it talks about, those who have accepted the mark and what the wages are for those who have accepted it. And then specifically, those who don't and are sealed to God. You want to be sealed to God? Or you want to be sealed to the beast? All right, that's it. This has been Kevin Stone for Keystone Outreach. If you got questions, you can always write comments under the video on YouTube. If you're seeing it on my little religious site, of course, you can or page, you can write comments there. Or if you want to send me questions, you can email them to keystoneoutreach@gmail.com, and I'll certainly answer any questions or concerns. If you want to, if you start looking here and you can't, you get stuck or something, I can point you to a resource. But ask God; He'll point you in the right direction. All right, that's it. We're out. We'll see you for the 7th video, topic 6 next time. All right.